Neil Thompson. Honourable Wilson Tucker, please.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'd just like to piggyback on the line of questioning by the Honourable Neil Thompson related to the Commissioner. And you mentioned building up this sort of body of evidence of these decisions that have been made public. Is that under is that section 11C, disputed tenancy matter?
Minister.
If you read together 11C, 11J, which is about the notice of decision, and 11K about publishing decisions and reasons, you read those things together, and yes.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Minister. So there are some prescriptive reasons or disputes in the bill, I believe, around modifications and pets. And so this disputed tenancy matter, is that considered largely a catch-all by the Commissioner? And there's going to be regulation to back that in terms of what is considered a disputed tenancy matter?
Minister.
So the powers that the Commissioner will be able to exercise in respect to the dispute resolution process will be around minor modifications, pets and bonds. And there's a head of power in the legislation, what's that at? 11E, in the event that it became obvious that there was some other area that needed and would benefit from having that kind of less adversarial approach to resolving disputes. There's the power to add to that, but there's no plan at this point. There's no sense of what that might be or whether we need to do it at all.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Minister. So that head of power is in 11E, which mentions that regulation to be made to prescribe a disputed tenancy matter by the Commissioner.
The power to determine a dispute will be about three matters: bonds, pets and minor modifications. But there's a head of power, a regulation-making provision within the bill which says if we think that we need to give her the power to resolve other matters, we have the capacity to do that.
Okay, and that'll be through regulation?
Yes.
Okay, but there's no thought to do that, or it's only if there's a sort of an unforeseen circumstance that will arise. So it is, I guess the desire here is to keep it quite prescriptive around what the Commissioner will be disputing.
Minister.
Chair, thank you. We already know what the biggest areas of dispute are now, and we can anticipate what they will be going forward. Bonds is the major one. And there are new provisions, obviously, around pets and minor modifications. So we anticipate there'll be some around that as well. But like I said, there is the provision within the Act, in the event that something else, some other area, became really obvious that it was a problem, I don't know what that might be, we could add that to the list of, so there's three things now that can be resolved using this dispute resolution process. It might be at some point in the future there's a fourth. We don't anticipate what that might be. We have no plans to add an additional one, but the power is there in the event that we need it.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. So there's these three provisions now for the Commissioner. So it's a case that if it falls outside those three, then what is where can say a renter go if it falls outside of those three currently? Because I know there is some provisions here where it does go to the courts around the retaliatory actions by the lessor, by the tenant, but ignoring that sort of workflow, that input into the courts. Where can someone else go if they've a renter go?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. It's the Magistrates Court, Honourable Member.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, just on the National Cabinet discussion, what is WA's role in that discussion and who's responsible for having that discussion and working on those sort of a uniform policy position?
Minister.
Minister for Housing is responsible for feeding in what the Premier takes to National Cabinet. Everybody around the National Cabinet knows what Western Australia's position is. We've said, we're happy to participate, but we're certainly not leading the work, and we are not going to change our policy on it in the foreseeable future. But to the extent of who feeds information into the Premier when he goes to National Cabinet, it will be Minister Carey. My office works very closely with Minister Carey, and if information was required or policy assistance was required, we'd work together on that.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Minister. So it's a National Cabinet discussion that moves that needle and then agrees on this national approach, or is there someone that's allocated within a government department somewhere in WA having those sort of behind-the-scenes discussions?
Minister.
No, nobody is. The work, if there was to be some work being done on that now in Western Australia, it would be led by Minister Carey. That work isn't being done right now. We have said at the National Cabinet we're happy to work with the other states on what kind of best practice model might look like. We're not going to lead the work. We're not going to, and we're not going to implement it. That's not our policy position. So work on that particular matter is not being done in Western Australia right now.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
So, Minister, given that you've ruled out revisiting no grounds evictions within the term of this government, you said it might be on the table in the next term if Labor. You didn't say that. Okay. So what is the position for no grounds moving forward in light of this National Cabinet discussion?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. I understand this is an important issue to you. I don't know how to say it another way. We're not doing it for the reasons that I've outlined. This government is not doing it. I can't possibly speak for a future government. I won't be part of it.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Minister, I'm just trying to work out if you're taking off the table until the next election, or you're taking off the table for the next term of government if Labor were to be re-elected.
I can't possibly make a commitment about what the next government may or may not do. I won't be a part of it, number one. That's funny. It can't be an alliance because, well, I don't know. You don't want to be part of it. Honourable member, what the Premier has made clear, and I have made clear, is this government is not shifting our position on that issue.
Honourable Brad Petitt.
I'll just follow up on that because I can't help it. Since we debated this yesterday, and there's a headline this afternoon in the West Australian which reads, Cook government didn't consult counterparts over no ground evictions bans, but insist it would hit rental stock. So I'm just trying to understand how, if we're ruling it out so categorically now, it's the strongest I've heard you say it, on what basis? Because, I mean, what this article goes on to say is simply that there was no, for those, as I said yesterday, lots of states have done it, but there was no consultation with those around what impact it had on their rental stock. In fact, there's no evidence, to the best of my knowledge, that it does impact rental stock. So I'm trying to understand on what basis it's so categorically a no, given every other state is doing this.
Minister.
I feel like I might be talking to myself.
Sorry?
Thank you.
Well, that's why.
Yeah, this lot, they read the code. Honourable member, a couple of things. None of the other jurisdictions consulted with us about what their policy position would be, and I'm not offended by that. I wouldn't expect them to. So we each make our own decisions as they impact our respective communities, and of course we will always stand up for what's right for West Australians. easy segue that you gave me, honourable member. So I've already outlined the reasons. Our judgment is that there may be a risk to investors' decisions on the critical issue that we need to address, which is supply of rental stock. And we didn't want to take that risk. Now, you may disagree with me, and if you follow the argument...
Your interjection, though, is what is the evidence of that judgment?
And that is the argument that the Honourable Wilson Tucker has been trying...
I'm trying to work out, you didn't consult with states...
He's been trying to skewer me on it.
I'm trying to skewer you, just trying to understand on what basis the decision was made.
I know that you're trying to understand it. I'm trying to help you understand it. The position we took was that it may have an impact on an investment decision by someone looking to buy a rental property to rent out. And we were not prepared to take that risk. It's as simple as that. Now, you will disagree and you will say, well, I think you should have relied on economic study X or economic study Y, and I think you should have taken a different decision. And I respect that that's your point of view. But we took the point of view this was the right thing to do at the right time, given the state of the market, and that what we really need to do is to properly address supply and not put something in the way which may be an impediment to supply. I get that you don't agree with that, but that is our position.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Minister, this may frustrate you, but I'm going to continue down this line of inquiry. Can you confirm that the Minister for Housing, the Honourable John Kerry, and yourself didn't consult or look at other jurisdictions when you came to the decision to not include the removing no grounds evictions?
Well, there's two different questions in there. There's a question about whether we consulted, and there's a question about whether we looked at the policies of other jurisdictions. And of course we looked at the policies of other jurisdictions. That's a standard way of conducting the process by which a DRIS, for example, is done, which is the Decision Regulatory Impact Statement. You look at what's been done in other jurisdictions. So of course we looked at what was being done in other jurisdictions, and that happened officer to officer level. Did Minister Carey or me ring up our equivalent ministers in each state and territory and ask them? No, we didn't. And they didn't do that to me, and I wouldn't expect them to. But of course, looking at what is the state of play in other jurisdictions was part of the information that was put in front of government. Of course it was.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Minister, I take your point that you mentioned there is potentially a risk that it will affect the housing supply if you were to remove no grounds evictions, and I understand that. But there's approximately 700,000 renters in WA, and I think they deserve a bit of insight or sausage making, if you will, into how that decision was arrived upon, rather than just there was a risk. Now we've heard that the housing minister didn't consult, and so I guess my question here is who was consulted with within WA to arrive on that decision to not remove no grounds evictions?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. All of the stakeholders, I think they're even listed. Are they listed in the DRIS? All of the relevant stakeholders, Honourable Member. This is a very consultative process, very consultative. From a document that goes out in the first instance, which is called a CRIS, Consultative Regulatory Impact Statement, which asks stakeholders, here are a series of questions. What is your view on these questions? From that, then, a Decision Regulatory Impact Statement, a DRIS, is prepared for consideration by government. And the DRIS looks at, here are the questions that were asked. Here is, on the one hand, this group of people who we consulted with said this. On the other hand, this group of people that we consulted with said that. Very deeply consultative process. And on top of that, since I've been the minister, which was December 2022, that's my practice in how I do my business, I have regular meetings with all of the stakeholders across my portfolios, and I have had numerous meetings with all of the stakeholders about what the DRIS might look like, what the government's thinking was, are testing various ideas with them. So this has been a deeply consultative process. Now, I think it's quite mischievous to suggest there is anything in the proposition that Minister Carey or I did not consult with other ministers in other jurisdictions. We wouldn't, and we don't. We rely on the advice that's provided to us by the officers. Here is the the regime, if you like, in each jurisdiction around Australia, and occasionally they might even say, and here's what they do in New Zealand on a particular issue, or here's what they do somewhere else. That's normal practice of developing these kind of regulatory policy changes. That's normal. That headline is it's a bit cheeky to suggest there's some inadequacy in John Carey not ringing up the Minister for Housing in Victoria or South Australia or Tasmania. I mean, it's suggesting that he's done something that is not the way these policy formulations happen.
Honourable Dr Brad Petitt.
Thank you. But this is where we're coming from, though, is that, so I'm pulling up again all the other states. It's trying to understand where New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia this year, Tasmania, ACT, all of them have come to the same conclusion that you shouldn't be able to terminate without grounds. So I mean, I appreciate it feels like it was a bit of a vibe around why we shouldn't. But I think there is a legitimate question that this place should ask, which is about and I come back to using evidence, and there's evidence which is both evidence around what best practice around what works in other jurisdictions, and evidence around actually just, you know, simply what is best practice around actually for renters. Now, it feels like to me there must have been some very strong evidence to suggest that it was going to somehow stymie investment, but I'm not. I mean, and if so, what was that? Because there's such a strong evidence base on the other side that says best practice for renters as we go forward across the country is getting rid of no grounds of evictions. So was there any clear evidence base that said this will stymie investment, or was it just a bit of a vibe? A vibe from... Sorry, it's a reference to the castle.
Oh, I know. I get the reference. I love it. I love the movie. So, honourable member, I know, because I've known you for a long time, that you're a smart person. I've known the Honourable Wilson Tucker for a period of time. I'd still say I think he's a smart. I'd still say he's a smart person. So I think you do understand what I've been saying to you, but you disagree with it, and that's okay. You can disagree with it, and you can keep prosecuting the argument that because I don't have an economic study to pull out and say here's the economic study on which we made this particular policy decision, that you are going to say that was a faulty decision. I understand that's the point you're making. I understand that's the point. Go and look at how many questions the Honourable Wilson Tucker has asked me. Okay, I get the argument that you're putting, I really do. The decision was made that given the particular circumstances in Western Australia, we did not want to take the risk. Now, you can say, well, as you did in your second reading speech, that was too timid. I get it. I get that that's your point of view. But on this issue, that's what we've decided.
Honourable Brad Petitt.
Okay, I mean,
I got you, Steno.
yes, I mean, what I would say is no one was talking about rent controls, was talking about no-cause evictions. They're very, very different things and miles apart. One is about...
Honourable members, if I just interrupt for a moment,
Yes.
please. The debate is happening between the Minister and the Speaker on their feet.
Right,
so I'd appreciate it if it would
Thank you, Chair. So on that basis, Chair, I'd like to return to a different line of questioning, perhaps, which is around housing standards. And obviously, I think this is important around how we about rental standards more generally, and there's been some really good work on that. And I do want to understand the government as the biggest owner of rental housing in this country. Does the government know across the housing stock what their standards are, and by that I mean in terms of, in terms of energy efficiency and the like, and maybe as a follow-up to that, and if you know the question of already, how are you measuring and enforcing these conditions, both in terms of social and public housing?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question, Honourable Member. I'm not in a position to answer that. I'm not Minister with responsibility for public housing, so you'd need to direct that question to Minister Carey. I'm happy to take something on notice and see if I can get an answer for you, but there are other ways to pursue that question. On the question of minimum standards, that is one of the issues that was kind of hived off and put into tranche 2, so that work will be done in tranche 2. But in terms of giving you data about what is and isn't a minimum standard right now in public housing, I'm not the right minister to answer that question.
Okay. Just before we jump up,
Honourable Brad Petitt.
Thank you, Chair. Just one other one, which might be just whether, which is a broader question, actually don't need to know the data, but whether you know whether the government is reviewing whether public housing has insulation or fans or other energy efficient aspects as part of the Department of Housing's Building Condition Assessment Program. Are you aware of that? And certainly if not, I can ask the Minister, but it would feel like they're obviously an important element as we go down this route.
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. No, I'm not. You'd need to address that question to the relevant minister. What I can say to you is that this Act applies to public housing as well in terms of the rights and obligations of renters and lessors. So in working on the matters that are before us now and in working on the matters that will be in tranche 2, we will be in consultation with them because it impacts them in the same way that it impacts private lessors and private renters as well. So we will work with them on that. But in terms of the specifics around public housing stock, you would need to address that to Minister Carey.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'm going to go back to no grounds evictions. The article today, so we've eliminated the lack of, we've determined that there wasn't any consultation happening with the East Coast counterparts. That's fine. The article mentions that the Housing Minister, the Honourable John Kerry, insists that removing no grounds evictions would hit rental stock. Now, the language you've used so far is there's a risk, and the language that the Housing Minister used is he insists, he's confident that removing that would have a detrimental effect to housing stock. So what I'm trying to understand is where is that confidence, where is that insistence coming from? And we've eliminated there's no consultation happening outside the state. So what I am trying to determine is what consultation specifically around no grounds evictions happened, and what were the inputs and what were the drivers. Now, we know there was a fair amount of consultation that was undertaken by this government. Could you maybe boil this down and just give me perhaps just the proponents that raise concerns with no grounds evictions specifically?
Minister.
So, while I wait to see if the officers can find if there's anything more specific I need to say, let's deal with the first proposition, because I think you mischaracterised what I said about consultation. What I said was it's silly, it's mischievous to think there is something awry in the Minister for Housing for Western Australia not personally consulting with the Minister for Housing in any other jurisdiction about the development of this policy. But I did say what happened was officer to officer. I'm sure there were conversations, and indeed, material was provided to government about what the policies were in existing in other jurisdictions. So that happened, but let's put that to one side. In respect to the consultation, I'm happy to answer your questions, but if you really want to get across this policy, you should go and read the CRIS and read the DRIS, because it is all laid out there. So 350 submissions received in response to the CRIS, and there's probably a list of them somewhere, which we can get for you. But when it came down to the issue of no grounds evictions, that particular policy point, from the point that I got the portfolio, which was December 2022, I was liaising with Make Renting Fair Alliance and Shelter, and then all of the members in the alliance, and I was liaising with REWA, both of whom had different points of view about no grounds evictions. But before I got the portfolio, a whole lot of work had been done in the CRIS and in preparing the DRIS, where more stakeholders were consulted than just those two kind of groups.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. So we know that the DRIS recommends the removal of no grounds evictions. I believe you mentioned previously that the pandemic played a role in the government not supporting the recommendation from DRIS. Could you just sort of confirm that timeline of when that decision to not remove no grounds evictions was taken?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. It was a decision of Cabinet, Honourable Member, and I can't remember the date. But the point I was trying to make about COVID was that I think I just think it would be unfair to judge where we ended up on and say that somehow the DRIS or the CRIS was inadequate. I think that would be unfair because they were started at a very different point in where the market was, right? That's the point I was trying to make. Nothing more or less than that. So that was the point of COVID, that the process started, then there was a gap because we all then had to scramble and pivot to put in place, moratoriums and all sorts of things to protect people during the actual peak of the pandemic. And then we could revisit policy settings more generally going forward in a post-COVID world. And by that point, the market had fundamentally changed. That was just the point I was trying to make.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Minister, are you able to just give a sort of approximate timeframe when that decision of Cabinet was made? The first time that I've seen that no grounds evictions wasn't supported by this government was there was a press conference with the former Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan, last year, where the Premier then basically scrapped no grounds evictions and took it off the table very quickly in a very flippant manner. I've had some discussions with people about how that decision was arrived upon, and there was apparently a conversation with REWA and the Premier, and a captain's call was made and the decision was made, and then that was publicly announced, and here we are. Are you able to elaborate on when that decision was made or how it was arrived upon?
Minister.
Thank you. It is not unusual at all for the Premier of the day or even the Minister of the day to say, this is where we think our government's going to be on this position. That's not unusual. It's perfectly normal. And the former Premier, as the current Premier, me, former ministers for this portfolio, regularly met with the stakeholders. The former Premier regularly met with WACOS and others, for example. I have no clue if there was some particular meeting where he said something to REWA. I wouldn't know about that. I know that it was my job to present the Cabinet submission, and I did that, and a decision was made in the terms that we see in the legislation before us.
The question is that Clause 1 stand as printed. All those... Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Ministers, is it fair to say, regarding the consultation process and the proponents that have raised concerns, well, for and against no grounds eviction, so it came down to Make Renting Fair Alliance on one hand and REWA on the other?
Minister.
Honestly, I've said this about 5,000 times, I feel. there was a long process. It started in 2019. By the time that I took over the portfolio, views were coalescing around the key issues in Tranche 1. And while I certainly took note of all of the work that had been done in the C-RIS, which led to the D-RIS, so I was aware of all of the different views, when it came to consultation about the what the government might consider to put in legislation for Tranche 1, who I was dealing with were really the Alliance and REWA. Now, I meet a lot of people and I go to a lot of events and a lot of functions, and I can't stand here and put my hand on my heart and say nobody else raised it with me, because I just can't remember. But the main kind of groups that I was dealing with, and bear in mind, I meet WACOS about a whole bunch of things, and in a meeting with WACOS, who are also members of the Alliance, they might raise this, but I also meet with them when they come and see me as part of the Alliance. And I meet Shelter about a whole lot of things, and they also are part of the Alliance. So there was a lot of conversations that went on, but it's certainly accurate to say when, you know, the finer points of the policy were being settled, really the two major groups, after all of the consultation and the whatever number of submissions was received, who I was dealing with was REWA and the Alliance.
Honourable Member, I've been listening very closely to the debate. There does seem to be some degree of repetition taking place. I just urge you to perhaps refresh your line of questioning. Honourable Wilson-Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. And this is the last question I do have on no grounds. Minister, I take your point and I understand we're largely, not quite the whole way there, but largely where the government got to this position. But I'm just trying to get some level of insight or something I sort of take away. And when I do talk to people about the government's decision and why it was made and why no grounds evictions wasn't included or removed rather as part of this reform, what can I tell them? Like, what assurance or what input or insight can I give to them, other than it was a risk or the housing minister insists that it's going to affect supply? Like, what else can I give them?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. You can tell them whatever you want, Honourable Member. It's not my job to tell you how you need to consult with your constituents. You might like to reread Hansard if you're unsure of anything I've said. But that's for you.
I'm not unsure. I'm just a little bit disappointed.
Well, I can live with it. And I don't mean that disrespectfully at all, Honourable Member. So it is for you to characterise how you want to characterise this decision. I don't expect you to defend the government's decision. We're capable of doing that ourselves. And I don't take anything away from the strength of feeling that you have on this issue. I understand it and I respect it.
Honourable Brad Petitt.
Can I ask one last question on no grounds eviction before we move on? I understand that there actually is 7 existing grounds, including nuisance and not paying rent for evicting people. And I guess the question that emerges is what more would actually landlords need in terms of having certainty as investors when there's already clearly existing grounds? And the context for this is actually noting that Canberra, which has the highest vacancy rates in the country at the moment, was the first jurisdiction to introduce no grounds evictions. So there are certainly, I think, really good cause for that. But I think I do want to come back to that because there are existing grounds. And are there any examples around what certainty you heard that investors would need so they would have clear existing grounds?
If I understand the question, thanks, Chair, what certainty do I think investors would need? Well, Honourable Member, I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is what I have said before, which is it was our judgment that in the current circumstances, making all of the other changes that we are making, we did not think it was appropriate to take the risk that we might influence someone's investment decision when the biggest issue we are facing is supply.
The question is that Clause 1 standards printed Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Oh, come on, you said it was the last.
Thank you, Chair. It was on no grounds, so I've got some questions on rent bidding, Minister. The proposed changes to rent bidding is around the solicitation of the bid, and I believe that is, I'm pretty sure every other state and territory has also included that same provision. Victoria is moving to remove or outlaw the acceptance of the bid. My question is, did WA consider a similar model to Victoria, where you're taking a more, I guess, comprehensive ban of rent bidding?
Minister.
Thanks very much. No, honourable member, we did not consider it in the drafting of this. There is a view that says you might have an impact on, you might end up with a kind of perverse effect where in fact the prices are put up, if you like, to artificially try and get around that. So I do note a couple of other jurisdictions are looking at doing it. We'll see how it goes for them, but there's no intention for us to do that in the short to medium term.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
Minister, when these laws come into effect, how are you going to sort of measure them in the wild and ensure that rent bidding isn't still happening?
Minister.
This is a very exciting part of this portfolio. They will do secret shopper. And so they'll have spies that will go out and make mock applications to test whether or not the system is working as it should. And I'm being flippant when I say spies, because they're not really spies.
Honourable Wilson Tucker.
That is very exciting, Minister.
Yeah. That might be my job. That might be my job post-mortem.
That's my excited voice.
I could do it 2 days a week, post-2025.
Minister, I did ask a question today around the existing rent bidding laws, and there's been 2 complaints related to rent bidding since February 2020, one in September 2023 and the other in October 2023. That's obviously a very small number that have gone to consumer protection, and then you're sort of beefing up these laws under this reform. It seems like there's a sort of I guess, an education piece in the public around what these laws are and where the complaint sort of avenues are and where they exist. What is the government doing in that space?
Minister.
Thank you. So it's currently not illegal to do that. So it's not surprising that more formal complaints haven't been made. I'd also make the point that anecdotally, all of the members of Make Renting Fair Alliance were telling me that's what was happening, and others. In terms of the education piece, though, yes, an education campaign is being planned because there are a lot of changes to happen here, and we will make sure that people understand both their rights and their obligations. Honourable
Wilson Tucker.
Minister, the penalties for engaging in rent bidding, I believe, is $10,000. It seems quite large. I'm just trying to understand how that number was landed upon.
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. So that's the maximum. So it's up to $10,000. It doesn't mean that every offence is going to receive that fine. It will depend on the circumstances of the case.
The question is that Clause 1 stand as printed. All those of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Those to the contrary say no. I believe the ayes have it.